Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about one of our new storyline games, Eibhlin's Quest. This is designed by one of our senior designers and developers, Bill Milstead. This webinar will be recorded, and we will get a copy out to you after the webinar is finished. We have Bill Milstead with us today. He'll be presenting and introducing us to this this new game. Bill, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everybody. Looking forward to presenting.
We're very excited to have you with us, and we're excited to take a dive into this game. If you have questions during the webinar, we will be ready to answer your questions in the questions panel, and we'll try to bring those up to Bill as well so that he can answer them for everyone. So feel free to use that questions panel as you need it. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can. If we can't get to your question, we'll do our best to answer that question in the webinar recap, or if you still don't get a response from us, reach out to us. We'd love to take your questions and walk you through this game one-on-one. We'll also be using the show of hands feature today to get some questions answered. So right now, if everybody can click on that raise of hands button, it should be right on your webinar GoToWebinar panel. All right, excellent. It looks like a lot of you are finding that button. We're at about 60% now. So I'm going to go ahead and put those hands down, and just know that we'll be using that feature a few times to help you guys participate and get us to understand where you guys are coming from. Also, just so you know, one of the things that we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time we want to touch base and find out if you need one-on-one with the webinar subject. So we may reach out to you after the fact. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you, Bill.
All right. Okay. So yeah, hi everybody. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Bill. And I built a game using Storyline 3's built-in functionality for everything. No JavaScript, just variables and triggers, and it's called Eibhlin's Quest. So we're going to be talking about that today. I'm going to walk everyone through the steps that we took to build the game, kind of at a higher level, right? And then if we have enough time, towards the end, maybe start to take a peek under the hood to see how this thing runs, okay? Now, so there is a live preview of the game, if you haven't seen it, that is out on the eLearning Brothers library. If you've not seen it, I would recommend that you do go take a peek at it. It's under the Storyline Games library page. I'm sure Andrew can toss a link up, or we can have that for us at the end of this as well. But basically, just a quick overview of the game. Eibhlin's Quest follows a girl named Eibhlin. She's chosen for her purity of heart to find and defeat an evil darkness that's consuming her world. So, let's say a never-ending story, right? She encounters a number of characters along the way. Some of those provide assistance. Some of those harm her. When she's harmed, she can visit a magical spring that refreshes her health, and she does that by answering challenges, and quizzes. Several additional points along the journey, she has to solve puzzles or heightened challenge questions to earn rewards that are necessary to defeat bosses that she might encounter. There are a number of different levels, a number of different elements of traditional gameplay, and a whole lot of interaction that can be customized by you guys. So let's get started. Before we do that, I want to take a quick poll though. How many of you are familiar with Storyline 3? Just a show of hands.
All right, the hands are coming in. A lot of people are familiar with Storyline 3. There is one quick question: is this available only in Storyline 3?
So the game right now is built in Storyline 3 and is available only in Storyline 3, and it does take advantage of several of Storyline 3's features, but I would say that the actual substance of today's discussion, and actually a lot of the mechanics of the game in Storyline 3 are also directly translatable to Storyline 2. So I would say that At this point, we're mostly looking at process in a high level. As we continue webinars in this series, if we do, or if we have additional time towards the end of this, we can look at Storyline 3's specific issues with it. I would say long-winded answer, though. Yes, but I do believe it's translatable.
Okay.
Right.
The poll results are 30% of people, or about 42 people, are familiar with Storyline 3.
Okay, great. I mean, so half of us right there. So that doesn't preclude the rest of us, I think, from getting probably a lot out of this, because again, we're going to look at process and kind of broad ideas for how we would build something like this out. So then, my next question, show of hands here. How many of us have experience building games? And that, e-learning games, ILT games, frame that however you want. How many of us have experience building games in general?
All right, it looks like of the hands raised of people that have experience building games, we have 35 people that are familiar with games. It's about 25% of our audience today. Okay, so I would actually say that's probably great. That in the long run, not having a huge amount of experience with games might be pretty good for today's session, because we're going to start right at the top. And that, I would say, we're going to go ahead and not to inundate you with all these questions right up front, we're going to toss another poll up to frame this. And I'd like to ask, what do you guys think is the most critical step in e-learning game development? We've got a poll up on the screen. Your options, those should be content design and planning, front-end design, development, or user testing. I want to get a feel for what we think about that as well. All right, Bill, those responses are coming in. We've got about 50% of people have voted now. I'll just give you some of these early results. It looks like a high percentage, about 70% of people are backing content design and planning. There's also quite a bit of support for user testing. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys 5 more seconds to vote before we put all of these final results up on the screen. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and here's those results.
All right. Well, that's great. That means I get to skip part of this where I try to sell you on this notion that planning is the most important piece, because in my experience, and clearly as you guys are in agreement, it is, right? Especially when you're dealing with something as complicated as an e-learning game. Unfortunately, I've found that we do tend to skip it a lot, right? But if you think about it, it makes a ton of sense, considering planning has a lot of downstream impacts, right? You miss something at the planning phase, that can lead to redundancies and lost work time. It is pretty critical. That I would say would be where I spent the majority of my time building, and we're going to start looking at that in a second. And even having spent a ton of time in the planning phase, I ran into a number of unexpected circumstances that if I had put some more consideration into the planning phase, I think I could have avoided. But that's neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and hop into the actual planning portion of it. So yeah, planning. Planning for an e-learning game, most critical phase, obviously your first step, and it covers a lot of ground. The idea of planning here, we're talking brainstorming, and defining game elements through storyboarding, early UAT socialization, things like that, of our ideas if you choose to take it that far. So accordingly, we could spend probably an entire webinar here. But really, I mean, we could probably spend an entire series just talking about the background of gaming elements, rules and goals and meaning and how those impact each. But we're on a pretty short timeline, and I want to run through a lot of things today. So rather than spend a bunch of time on game planning, if you're not familiar with it, I would just suggest that you guys do some work on your own. Go out, check the interwebs for some info on what makes a game work, and considerations for your own project. It was not my strong suit prior to taking on this challenge from eLearning Brothers to build this game out, but a few hours of tinkering around on the internet led to some great understandings. Sharon Bowler, one thing that I will draw attention to over at Knowledge Guru, has a great white paper that's free that does cover a lot about gaming and game mechanics, called Using Game Mechanics and Game Elements in Learning Games. I could definitely recommend that as a starting resource. Otherwise, I would suggest hopping on back to the internet and trying to find as much as you possibly can and consuming it. Now, that being said, obviously there's going to be give and take on gaming elements and gameplay due to limitations of budget and so on. But yeah, it's a good idea to have a good background. That spiel done, here's the basic process that I personally used. First step for me in any of these pieces is it's always brainstorming, right? Of course it is. This is a pencil and paper process for me. So I start roughing out ideas with bullet points, which eventually usually turns into kind of a big doodly brain map of whatever the leading idea happens to be. Now, in this case, in this game, the goal was to create a game that used pretty much exclusively Storyline 3's built-in functionality that was editable by users of many different skill levels, and that really probably was going to incorporate a lot of quizzing elements. So I knew that gameplay complexity would probably be a little bit limited, and that would define some limitations on game design and probably the story itself. So, you know, luckily I grew up a child of the 80s and early 90s. I've got a wealth of low-bit, you know, side-scrolling adventure games in my memory bank, so I kind of started there and started drafting out basic ideas. First ideas were pretty limited: Paperboy, Overdrive, you know, very quick quizzes. And then eventually I happened on kind of an idea of really thinking like, almost like a girl-driven version of Zelda, you know, using my daughter's inspiration. And you know, ideas kind of start to move. Eventually you map out this notion of we've got obstacles, we've got, you know, challenges along the way, and you start kind of fleshing those notes out as much as you possibly can, drawing out your environments and getting kind of a feel for what it is that you're going to build, right? Once you've got that basic picture in mind, from there we start to turn this into a more fleshed out object, right? Having selected a topic, just kind of broad strokes, come up with these real rough character sketches, had a real vague idea in my mind of how this thing I thought might come together. I started mapping out a story in Microsoft Word, and I used Joseph Campbell's Stages of the Hero's Journey as kind of a basic guide for the story to give myself something to frame against. If you're not familiar, it's a framework for pretty much all archetypical stories. So like Star Wars, for instance, leans pretty heavily on this model. Wikipedia is a great resource, honestly, if you ever have to get through the process of crafting a story from start to finish, and you need kind of catch points along the way, certain items you gotta hit, certain, you know, character turning points. It's a great tool to use to kind of map that story out. So doing that, using this, I kind of roughed out the introduction, the character's call to action, the flow of the game, supporting characters, tools, etc., in a very long, I think probably 8 or 9 page, you know, set of notes, and referred back to this as much as I possibly could, you know, as I found gaps during later planning and organization. From here, obviously, you know, we've got a Word document that tells the story that I'm looking for, but frankly, I found a lot of difficulty translating that when trying to discuss what I'm trying to build with other folks on the team, you know, people at home. You're getting that feel for what you're doing. Had a lot of difficulty using that Word document. So from there, I went ahead and translated those notes into a pretty visual flowchart. And that served a few purposes. So the first thing, obviously, you know, it provided a way for me to visualize kind of the flow of the game, to look for gaps in my notes previous, to look for missed connections, you know, holes in the story, things like that. And much simpler to do once you've laid out this pretty linear story you've created now in a way that you know, is easily digestible. So that in turn kind of also, that helped me to identify potential problem areas in the development. So now For instance, if I bounce over to this storyboard that I built, this flowchart rather, I've got a point in here in the game where, as Eibhlin's moved through 2 levels, she reaches a decision point, and if she's gained a tool from level 1, she can pass on, and if not, she's got to return back to level 1 to get it, and then move again through the game. So I identified that through this process, right? Identified that it was going to be a potential issue for development, as well as that it had impacts on, you know, some really the way that I was crafting the story. There would need to be some decision points for the character, or at least changes in scripting based on what our character has already done or not at this point in the game, if that makes a ton of sense. Now, identifying those issues later in the process wouldn't have been critical, wouldn't have been super problematic, but it did end up saving a huge amount of development time for me, you know, by identifying early, right? So I knew what types of conditionals I would need as I was developing my first 2 levels to kind of feed that backwards motion towards level 3. Finally, and this is what I would consider to be probably most important, having this document, you know, taking those notes where I've gone in and drawn everything out, laying this out in a visual sense, getting a real flow of what goes on where, what each character does, how they relate to each other, and where, you know, each kind of goal or reward occurs throughout the story, did a lot for me to be able to frame the discussion about the game with our internal team, right? So, you know, when talking to stakeholders, what are you trying to accomplish? Well, this. You can pop that up on screen and show them exactly what it is that you're trying to do. Because we can talk all day long about a set of bullet points, but having a visual there really helps to make sure that you're not missing some intricacies in the game, and frankly, you're not missing any impact. So I would say one of the most important elements in selling the game to stakeholders was this flowchart. After that, after having visualized this piece and sold it to you know, the powers that be as the basic idea here, how we were going to accomplish it, kind of moved into what I consider to be pre-production. So this is another gate checkpoint, but I set about kind of sketching out the environment, a few characters to give the game some shape, right? What roughly are our characters going to look like? What color palette are we going to be using here? What might our world look like? And then from there, I kind of moved on to wireframe a few basic movements and actions in the game to get a proof of concept for, again, those powers that be. Before we've dedicated a ton of time and energy into, you know, real gameplay, real development, and, you know, full-scale custom media development. Kind of start here with some proof of concept work and get our buy off. Moving into production, which basically, you know, wireframe in hand, kind of flats for design in hand and approved. We're talking about the actual act of getting this thing built now. So getting it into storyline, getting it ready for our users, and ultimately to be put into our template library, right? Now, the way that I handled this, moving directly into production, I separated pretty much immediately from storyline and focused exclusively on media. Graphics, how I was going to handle animation, the visual, the front-end design. And in doing so, the reason why I did that, you know, front-loading media development, if you are using custom media, helps ensure that you have everything ready to go once development begins. And for me, that trims a pretty significant amount of time off in the process, you know, in the long run. All my media assets, you know, the small-scale media assets handled, my individual characters handled. I moved on into scenes, laying out background scenes for my game. The way that I did that, I just brought everything into Illustrator for custom art. You could use stock here in any number of ways that you could do it. But Effectively, I created one gigantic scene that would be brought into storyline, and then I broke that down into sub-scenes based on the size of the storyline stage. Right? And you can kind of see that I've started numbering this large background image here that's going to be used in the game. I took this step to basically get an idea roughly of how many clicks each user would take to move through the level, where each element that would show up in the level needed to be to get kind of a firmer sense of final positioning. So for instance, in this level, we've got an eagle that kind of swoops down and then eventually comes back. I wanted to know, okay, about the 8th click or so, I'm going to launch that character. Similarly, different objects in the background here have different effects. Some of them are negative effects on the user, like these pine cones. We've got some interactions where users can shake these bushes up front or grab this honeycomb. I wanted that all grouped up front, and being able to kind of get a feel for the full length of this slide really helped me determine kind of where to lay everything out a little more precisely. All right. So that being done, everything laid out, I started chopping up backgrounds and exporting individual assets. Right. So I took these big giant backgrounds that I made and I brought them into Photoshop, and from there I broke everything apart into background layers, midground layers, foreground layers, whatever it is that you need to assemble a scene in Storyline. And again, we'll maybe start looking into that a bit in the future. Now a few tips here to facilitate this process and make it a little quicker for you. If you're not already familiar with it, Photoshop has a generate images option or image assets option, which is seriously helpful. The way that you use it, you create a PSD, you bring in your assets to individual layers, size them the way that you need them, and name them for production. So for instance, I need a PNG SO9_SL. I've named it that. If I needed that to be a JPEG, I would change the extension. Press File, Generate Image Assets, and save your file, and Photoshop will automatically export all of these assets that you've created and sized appropriately for your custom development. Now, in a template, you don't need to worry about that because we've handled all of it, but that's how we did it. Another quick tip, when you're creating large, very long assets in Storyline, for instance, for scrolling backgrounds, which is something we'll talk about in a bit here, the maximum Storyline size is 2,000 pixels. You can fool Storyline into accepting much larger images by kind of chopping them into smaller pieces and then reassembling them into states editing mode, right? So, for instance, we were to take a look at my background image here in this level, which we are seeing. You'll notice that it is actually several different images, if you see the bounding box there, placed together, side by side, in order to get an incredibly long background image that we can move back and forth on the screen there in Storyline. Okay. Now, once I had gotten all my pre-production handled, right? So I've gone through the process of creating my character assets. I've created all my backgrounds, my foregrounds, all of the objects that I need to run Storyline. I move it into Storyline. From here it gets complicated, right? So we just took a very quick look at one of the slides to see the background image. If you had gotten kind of a peek of the tabs that were up there, you might have seen how much is going on. If not, this is kind of a quick view of the actual scene setup here driving this game. So there's kind of a lot going on, a number of different scenes, each of which have some level of interactivity to them. I want to toss through a couple real quick basics on what's going on in here, and then we can start moving perhaps into some questions or some look at some variables of how this all really tactically works. Okay, so if you recall from the very first couple of slides here, I showed a few images where we had a character that looked like they were moving across the screen. If you've seen the live game preview or downloaded or played it from the eLearning Brothers library, what you'll notice is that we do have a side-scrolling game. We have a character. As you click on a navigational element, she changes position, right, from forward-facing to side-facing, walks, and we see some level of motion through her environment. It does look like she's moving either forward or backward through this environment that she's in each of these stages. That, just a quick basic here, that is an illusion. So that you can achieve the illusion of moving an object across the screen, like we've just described, by actually moving the background. And so kind of the core animation that's in this game, the thing that makes it work the most is that. We have layered objects, each of which move when the user clicks a navigational button, and it creates the illusion of our main character moving while she actually stays put in place on screen. So if you layer objects in the background and then apply different animation timings or easing to those different objects, you can get an even more interesting effect by playing with parallax there. Okay. Another kind of a key idea to know before we start jumping into much about the game or addressing game-specific questions. This game also uses a ton of timers. One of the things that occurs in the game, we have a lot of repetitive motion. So in one of our levels, we have pine cones that fall kind of seemingly randomly from the sky and impact our main character negatively. They hurt her health, right? Which then forces a user to go back and answer some questions to get some more health back and continue the game. Well, that occurs. It's really just one graphic that is moving on a motion path, and that it just does that repeatedly based on a timer. Similarly here in our final scene, the way that this scene is set up, we've got several negative characters. We've got these rats and bats, and they move across the screen and attack, right, in a random manner, repeatedly throughout the level. So as you move from the very beginning all the way till almost the end, you're pretty much constantly being attacked by these characters. But we're doing it, 20, 30 plus attacks, however you choose to time it, frankly, if you're the user. We're doing it based on 6 graphics and a whole bunch of timers. Some of the more complicated actions of the game, right, this kind of repetitive stuff, they're based on timers placed off screen. So if you want that attack to occur, let's say every 4 seconds, the way that this works is you trigger a motion, say rat 1. Once it completes its motion across the screen, you trigger a timer motion. When that timer motion completes, you trigger that rat motion again, and so on and so forth until you're basically done. With a combination of variables that can be used to check position of where the user is on screen and timers, you can get some pretty unbelievably complicated interactions to occur in storyline. Okay, the last little tip here is GIFs. Using animated GIFs is a great way to get some extra motion and pizzazz in the course, and we have an animated GIF in this course, or this game rather. But GIFs in storyline kind of come with some limitations. From what I can tell, and I may be wrong on this, but just from playing around, it appears as though the highest frame rate that storyline accepts in GIFs is about 10 frames per second. Anything faster than that, it seems to drop out. So I would say build your GIFs, if you're going to use them in whatever tool you're building them in, to that frame rate. So After Effects, Animate, Photoshop, however you're doing it, 10 frames a second is what you're looking for. Secondarily, build them to size. If you notice jagged edges in your GIF, once you've imported them into storyline, but not in the native output, check your size. Quality tends to go down a fair amount when you're resizing GIFs, so start with a target size for that asset and build to it. If you have a need for multiple sizes, build multiple assets. Beyond that, I wanted to stop and maybe take a moment for some questions and see if blowing through that, if anybody had any feedback on that, and then from here perhaps move into some core variables in the game and address game-specific or development-specific questions that we've not touched on yet. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, there's quite a few questions here, Bill.
Oh, sure.
And we've got a good solid 20 minutes of content, so some of these questions are going to be a little bit older.
Understood.
One question here is there audio in this game, or is it silent?
There absolutely is audio in this game. We actually had a video, of a gameplay queued up with some audio for you. but GoToMeeting sometimes gets a little choppy. The way that I've done it, it's actually customizable by you. So by default, there are a few different actually custom audio beds in the course. There are a few aside audios, as we're calling them, which happen in kind of non-core levels. So our supporting levels where we've got interactions that occur have one audio bed. Our introductory level has a separate audio bed, and then a second and third exist in 2 additional other levels, which is a lot of audio. A few things can happen there. One, that can actually also be turned off by the user very, very quickly with a simple variable, actually, if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. Global audio. So if a user wants to, a developer, you set that to true, and none of the audio in the game should work, right? Making it certainly simpler than going through and deleting everything.
Okay, another question we have is, just to verify, is this only usable in the newest versions of Storyline, whether that be 3 or 360, or can it be used in an older version of Storyline like Storyline 2?
Right. So it does use some Storyline 3 specific features, both in terms of we use some swipe just to allow tablet control a little, to be a little easier on some folks, but then also just the way that we've kind of chosen to handle some gameplay. It's specific to the way that Storyline 3 works. So yeah, it really is only specifically for the newest version of the tool. Need to look into how that plays with 360, just because I haven't opened it, frankly, in 360, but it should be applicable there as well. Not to prattle on too much about it, but I'd say 96 to 98% of what we've done in here, however, in terms of the way that we've built the course, is directly applicable to building a game in Storyline 2 as well. So, you kind of think of eLearning Brothers templates in 2 different ways. We take care of all of the craziness for you so that you guys get some, awesome products to play with, but also, as a learning tool to kind of apply to other products, it may be useful for you.
All right, another question here is, how do you deal with Flickr in changing states to animated GIFs and back?
That's a great question, and I didn't run into a ton of it, so I don't know that I have a wonderfully educated answer for you. I've seen it, and by and large, what I've found is that if I've built my my GIFs to the exact size that I need them, and I've kind of pulled down that frame rate, like I was mentioning earlier, I don't run into it a ton. But I don't have a better answer than that. I'm sorry.
All right, another question is, what is the main message of this game?
Main message of the game. So can I ask for some clarification on that from whoever asked that question? Is that possible?
So that question came from Sylvia. If you want to give us some clarity, bottom line in here, let me ask another question just to modify that. So the game is not like our customizable courseware where the content is already essentially placed. This is customizable, right? So when they download this game from our library, how much of it is their content as opposed to yours? I mean, the story is that she's going, according to the tag inside of, or the demo inside of our library, it says, her village faces impending doom from a creeping darkness currently consuming her world. Being purest of heart in her town, she was chosen to carry out a perilous journey to find the source of the darkness and defeat it. Right. So that's the general gist of the game, but then as someone that downloads it and uses this game, how much of it is customizable for their content?
Yeah, so my answer to that is as much as you are capable of customizing, we've tried to include here. Okay, so there are some fixed elements. Just in terms of kind of theming the game, there is a bit of a through line of the story that we just ran through there, right? Like, you know, all the graphics and kind of the basic idea of the game. We've got this little girl. She starts in kind of a safe village where our users, or a safe space where our users get to investigate gameplay a little bit. She moves on through, you know, a few similar layers. She's got to interact with a few characters, collect a few assets by answering questions. If she's harmed, she's got to go back and answer some additional quiz questions to gain some health back, right? She follows through those levels, defeats some bosses along the way, and in the end, right, it's effectively we're kind of repeating the same type of gameplay in a couple different levels, but increasing the stakes as we go. All of the graphics decisions are based on that game idea and through line. But the content itself and even some of the functionality in the game is entirely customizable, right? So if you wanted to append, you know, additional information into this game, so right now it does kind of serve as really a very complicated, you know, testing engine with opportunities to deliver content. If you wanted to kind of append additional content, you can do that at any point. There are several places where we've left that open for you. So, for instance, our first scene here, the users kind of really freely navigate this first level and interact with different objects. Some they're forced to. They get a choice to interact with most of them. As they click on each one of these different characters, for instance, they're taken to an extra kind of an aside layer or level or scene rather, excuse me. And in here, you know, content is delivered to help them learn a little bit about gameplay. Now, some of those characters are not necessarily critical. So, for instance, in this temperate forest, right, we've got our bunny character here who explains how to hop around. I don't know that that's necessarily a core instructional piece there, considering it's, you know, we've really got 3 buttons that the user can push. So conceivably, you could change all of the content in any of these scenes. Really, any text content that you wanted throughout the game, you could. You also could obviously add to any of these scenes, or if you felt comfortable with it, create, you know, additional triggers that would branch out to different scenes without affecting really the way that this game should work and should record completions to your LMS. Lastly, in terms of customization, it's not specific to content, but there are a number of variables that we've included here that the user can adjust to affect gameplay. Actually, everything at the beginning here that has an all caps in this variables pane that you see is adjustable by the user. So antelope pause, LNR, bear pause, beaver pause, bison pause. These are all the positions that certain characters in the game come out at. You can change where that is if you need to, or turn them off entirely. We've got a user guide that we've started that's out there that's got some explanation of basically all of these variables to help out with it. Similarly, you can adjust when what we're calling forced negative interactions occur, which is that, you know, something bad happens to our user. You can change when that occurs or if it occurs at all. So, long-winded answer, there's a ton that you can edit and adjust in here. If you need to change the storyline and can come up with something that still kind of fits the theme, more than doable. If you need to add to it, certainly. And we've gotten it set up in a way that you should be able to adjust some elements or even turn them off just with a kind of a basic understanding of storyline if you want to go kind of into a micro level of editing some of this stuff.
All right, great. Thanks for that answer. Yeah. We've had a lot of other questions about the estimated time from start to finish that it took you to build this game.
That's a great question. So, wow. In terms of, I don't have it broken down in terms of hours in front of me right now. I have that recorded, but I'm actually not on that machine, so unfortunately I can't give you that specifically. You know, so we started this in a rough sense in the beginning of April or so, just kind of mapping out the idea, and then between working on this project and other projects coming in as expected in a typical workflow, we wrapped this up within. Well, I wrapped it up within about 2 months, start to finish. Now maybe two and a half. But again, I think if I had been dedicated on it, if I had really been able to just focus exclusively on that, maybe even faster. This is my first game in this context, right? As well, and bringing it up to Storyline 3 and doing some experimentation in there. There were a few stumbling blocks. So I'd say about 2.5 months with the standard workflow or workload on top of it.
All right, great. There's a lot of questions that go back several slides, back to the beginning or middle of your presentation so far. One of them is for the storyboard of the timeline. Was that created using a specific piece of software, or is that all hand-drawn?
Yeah, actually, so I did this in 2 ways, to be honest with you, and I did it because I wanted to make sure that I could do it in a simple way. But this one I did in Illustrator, but I also put together a version that worked just as well to make sure that I could tell people, hey, I did this and you should too, in Word, and really just pulling in icons that I had from a stock library, or going on to there are a couple different, like Font Awesome and Noun Project, places like that have some really good free or cheap subscription glyphs and icons that you can use for mocking this stuff up real quickly in something as simple as Word.
All right, I'm just going to take one more question before we move on. There's a lot of questions in here, and we may take questions more later if we have time. But one question here, the last one we'll take now, is can you demo the off-slide attack timer triggers?
Yeah. Let's see if we can get this thing to play. So I'm going to see if this thing will run. Does that work for you, Mr. Townsend?
Let me see. I'm not seeing anything moving so far. Oh, yeah. I can see the preview loading.
Okay, let's see if this loads. So I'm gonna play through a couple seconds of this this level, which is probably the easiest one to show from this kind of attack timer standpoint, and then I'll show you how that works. All right, so we've got our character. We're moving her across the screen, and in this level we can move her up or down. I'm not sure how much that's breaking up, but
it's really smooth. Looks good.
All right, great. So as we go, if you notice, we've got some of these characters who kind of fly out, and if you move more across the screen, they do as well. If they make contact with you, they damage your health bar. And if you notice, they're not all coming in necessarily in the same pattern we have them laid out in the background. Okay? So how do we do that? Or rather on screen, not in the background. But so the way that we do that is actually fairly simple. I'm going to try to turn everything else off so that we've just got our rats and our main character here to go over. Yep. Bat 1, bat 2, and our timers. Okay. There we go. Attack timer 1 and attack timer 2. Okay. So what we've done here, each level begins towards the top of the slide trigger here with a set forced neg timing equal to a value. In this case, we've set it to 5. Now what that is the number of clicks basically that the user makes across the screen once we're recording an X position, right? So as they click right, it increments up. As they click left, it increments down. So once that X position registers at 5, we basically start our attacks. We set this forced neg variable, and that's what drives our initial attacks here, okay? So we're going to look at one rat here. Basically, we are moving that rat once. One moment. Sorry, hold on one second here. Yeah. Okay, so once we've got our force neg timing triggered, we set an attack timer. That attack timer, once it goes here, right, we trigger a motion for our rat. It enters the screen. As it moves across on our main animation here, if it has made contact with Eibhlin here, or Eibhlin here, and her Y position, so where she is on the screen, is not equal to 3, we're going to subtract some value there, which is to say that she's not up top. And then once that occurs, we're triggering this forced neg on screen variable to go to false, setting a rat Y pause variable to 1, which means that this is the last one that has occurred, and there we have it. We're also moving bat 3, which would be this one, across the stage once this guy is done moving. Now, that may not make a ton of sense. Does anybody have any questions about that? It may actually, now that I think about it, be easier to look at it in terms of another character, but if you do have questions, please let me know, and I'll try to clarify and make this a little simpler.
I'm watching some of these questions come in. While more questions come in about this particular item, I do want to ask this question. How many minutes does the game take to play all the way through?
Yeah, about 30 it seems like, if you're really going through every single element and touching every single item. But I believe that could be quicker. I've spent some time in there really kind of hanging up on it while we've done testing. So, and again, I apologize if that explanation was less than valuable. I can try to simplify that actually, if you need.
There's a question about how does the collision detection work?
Okay, and we're talking about in terms of on this level? Or,
that's right.
Yeah, okay. So the way that it works on the rats and the bats is a little less clean than I might like because of the way Storyline seems to handle object intersections. So I want to look at it in terms of each of these zaps, unless that's distracting. But basically, what happens here, at the simplest is, so like in this case, we're going to shoot one of these 3 objects across screen depending on where our boss is and where our main character is, right? And so in the simplest sense, when we've got that kind of thing going on, all I'm doing is using an object intersection and then subtracting a value from our amulet fill, which is what we're using as a health variable here, okay? Now, if I were to go back to that rats and bats example, just to kind of keep it, consistent, most of the time that's what we're doing as well, just a simple object intersection. But where it gets a little tricky with some of the sizes of these objects, Storyline, if you move, so for instance, if you move this rat across the screen and you just set it to be when the shape enters the slide or intersects with Eibhlin, subtract certain points. I have yet to figure out exactly what it is that's 100% causing it to occur, if it's a combination of the size or positions of these objects, but we're basically getting it to hit her too much. It's causing too much damage. So in that case, what I've done is I've added a Y position. So we're checking where on screen Eibhlin is based on where the user is clicking up or down. And if she is not at a specific location, so if she's not at the 3 Y position, so 2 up from where this rat is, then it's going to subtract a value from her once it enters the screen. So that I know there was a lot going on in there, but we're doing it in two different ways. Where we have really simple interactions, where there are no issues being caused, we're using a simple object intersection. Once that object passes through the main character, that's that. Where we've got a situation where a storyline is getting a little buggy with that method, I've also included basically just a checker. So as it moves across the screen, we're making sure that she's not in the possible path of that motion, and if she is, then we're subtracting points. So two ways.
As far as other questions or comments from other people, there's a lot of awesome feedback, Bill. Everybody loves this game. Looks great, very cool, nice art, lots of positive feedback. I do just want to reiterate to everybody, this game can be yours very easily today. It is in our Storyline Games library. It's in our template library, so you can grab that today if you want. Did you have anything else you wanted to present for us, Bill, before we move forward?
No, so just in this, I know. So what I have done is I have gone on to we've added a library document, a user guide to the library here. Because sometimes this stuff is challenging to really talk out, right? And we need to sit through it and go over in detail by ourselves. At least that's how I am. But it's also, there's a lot going on in this game here, right? Every single slide has a lot of triggers on it, and there's a lot of variables. I think it's something like 200 and I don't know. There's a lot of variables in here. So I wanted to set users up with a good bit of documentation, or at least, more than you might have expected to come out of with this. And so check the library. That's what I would say. In that document that I've put out there, I've basically detailed pretty much every variable you need to know anything about. Core variables like this, okay, so what are the 4 or 5 things that drive the game that you absolutely have to know about? Those are documented. An example where possible has been included. How it works, a basic explanation is there for you, so you don't have to hunt and peck or guess. There's also some commentary about how the conventions of the variables are used. So like I was telling you previously, anything that's got the all caps up front is editable by the user. Explanations of what each one of these are in that document, along, kind of with, in some cases, why that variable is the way it is. So if you had any questions that I didn't address, or if you had a question and I attempted to address it, but I gave kind of a not so clear explanation today, which is totally possible, check that document. I would really say that you're probably going to be pleasantly surprised about the level of detail that's in there. Yeah, that would probably be the only thing I really have to add, unless there are additional questions, or I'm not even sure if we have time. So.
Yeah, I do want to add that the information that has been mentioned in this webinar and all of the assets and such, aside from the template itself that you can get in our library, we will try to send you links in a follow-up email within the next few hours to some of the documentation and some of the ideas and things that Bill has talked about. And like I said, you'll also get a copy of this webinar, so you can scrub through and take a look at what you want to see yourself, or click on some of the documentation. So hopefully all this made sense and you didn't miss anything. If you came in late or missed anything, please call us at the phone number on the screen, or email us and we'll walk you through any part of it. There's likely to be a lot of people calling in after these webinars. We get a lot of phone calls in to walk through these templates or to get some clarification on what was said. So try to call in sooner so that you don't end up having to set up an appointment for further out in the week. But we'll try to set some time out for you. You can reach out to eLearning Brothers at our website. You can take a look at this particular template at elearningbrothers.com, click on our templates, and go find our Storyline games. Email us, call in directly. We'll be happy to speak with you. Like I said, I'm going to send an email out to all of you in the next few hours, and it'll include a recording of this webinar, our contact information, some other assets that we can put together for you. So be looking for that email. Thank you, Bill, so much. This has been a great webinar. Like I said, the audience sure seems to love this content. This game is amazing, and we're excited to have it added to our library. So thank you, Bill, and thanks everybody else for joining us, and we hope you have a good day.
Thank you guys so much. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.